Good evening. It's Thursday, October 14th at 6:30 p.m. And my name is Bill Horns, and I am calling to order tonight's meeting of the Transportation and Transit Commission. The first item of business is a roll call to determine if we have a quorum. I am here, William Horns. Charity Ellison could not be here. Rich Tate is here. Troy Klein is here. Jason Strauss has not logged in yet. Mike Gurnetsky is not here. Gabriella Gerhardt is here. So I think we have 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 7. So we have a majority. I believe that's sufficient for a quorum. So we do have a quorum. Public appearances on non-agenda items. I see no one here in the room and no faces on the screen, having logged into the Zoom connection. We have an agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move to approve the agenda.
Rich Tate moved to agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Gabriella, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed? There are none? Okay, minutes. You all have a copy of the minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move approval.
Gabriella moves approval. A second?
I'll second.
We have a second from Rich. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. All right, report from the department. Andrew, the lights are on you.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Not very well.
Oh, sorry. I will try to talk up. I know I'm just notoriously soft-spoken on these, so. So a few things. Fish Hatchery Road, so lower lifts today and tomorrow. We got most of the intermediate lifts done today. We're going to be buttoning up work Monday through Wednesday of next week, and then we'll be paving surface on Thursday and Friday if the rain holds off. Just a quick note, I know we said we weren't going to close Caddis, this whole project, and now we're probably going to close Caddis for about an hour and a half on Thursday. And so, we'll be putting out a release just to kind of clarify that. But I just want everybody to, basically, the benefit here is that we're going to do tandem paving. And so with that, we kind of get fewer seams, and we kind of get the job done faster. So just kind of heads up, and we'll be getting that out on the website and on the Fish Hatchery Road website as well.
Can we do a news flash about that, or is that already planned?
Yep. As soon as I was just waiting on some images just to make sure it's kind of clear of what the staging is, but most of that, as long as the rain holds off, most of that's going to happen on Thursday. That's going to be when the impacts are. So, and then after that, the next week after that, we're really switching back to kind of the regular lanes. So we'll still have work to do. There'll be some, the interior lanes will be closed to finish up street lights and that sort of thing. But you'll actually get to see what the road will look like by the end of next week. So that'll be really exciting. Wesley Road. So our consultant has worked through the 60% comments from the city. We'll be talking about the TPP tonight, the Transportation Project Plat. The intersection control there at Lacey and Seminole we'll be talking about tonight as well. South Saline, we had our second public meeting on September 29th. We had a pretty good turnout there, and we still have a kind of follow-up survey on the website, so on the sign-in webpage. So if folks are interested in commenting on any of that material, please feel free. And then we will be talking about the intersection control at East Sharrow and Saline tonight. So that's all I have. Any questions?
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for Andrew? No. The next item is item 7, review items. We have one review item, which is a generic transit service agreement. Andrew, could you introduce that, and then we'll see if there's any discussion.
Sure. So I have a couple bullet points just on this screen. But so we've met with Metro several times, kind of beginning last spring into the summer. They've been really transparent about this process and just kind of working on revising our 2015 agreement with them in order to encapsulate some of this escrow account and kind of make kind of service agreements a little bit more stable into the future. And so this is kind of our first look at the draft agreement that was included in the packet. So just a couple bullet points. So there are some additional costs associated with additional service hours by acquiring Town of Madison and kind of the service hours that go through there. Fitchburg would start with roughly 90% of our budget through an escrow, which was funded partially from kind of old surpluses. Basically, we in our previous contract, we had, I believe, a 15% kind of escrow account, just, again, to kind of smooth out highs and lows. Now we'll be moving to a larger share, basically because of the CARES Act funding. And so Fitchburg can use that escrow over the next several years as Madison Metro takes on some additional capitalized costs. We'll be kind of softening that blow that would be passed on to us by dipping into that escrow. And then by 2025, with a 3% annual increase in our partner share, Metro is predicting that cost will kind of level off, and so we'll just be increasing at 3% annually. And so really that's kind of, those are some of the big points. You can see in there, if at any point in time we dip below 25% of our annual operating budget in our escrow, then there will be a 5% premium in the next year. And so really they're just trying to make sure that we have some budget to kind of soften. You know, there's lots of uncertainty with transit. We definitely saw that with the COVID-19 changes, and I think we're just trying to build in a little bit more resiliency into the contract. So Metro's asking for comments back on this draft generic agreement. So basically, if you have any comments on it, we can kind of review those now. I can get those back to them, and then we'd be looking for a revised specific agreement to us and then council, probably in December. I think initially they were looking at Q1 to have all those approvals, but they might have moved it up a little bit. But basically, in the next couple of months, we'll get that agreement back with all the specific Fitchburg. You know, right now it's kind of generic and has just empty boxes in the tables, but we'll get it all back specific to Fitchburg, and we'll go through a process for approval.
Okay.
So they're just trying to make sure it matches as much as possible to all the other partners. So if you have comments, I can definitely pass them on to them, and then they'll get that specific agreement back to us.
Okay, did any other members have a comment or a question? Gabriella.
Just a quick comment that I think I was also in some of those early meetings with Metro, so I've been following this a little bit longer than it's been communicated to the committee, but it very much reflects what we've talked about. And I personally think we talked about a lot of solutions in those early meetings, and I do think this is a pretty good solution to keep from seeing large spikes over the next few years. And that CARES Act funding kind of gives us a one-time opportunity to make those investments into the infrastructure that they haven't been making for a long period of time. So I think it looks good so far. I'm looking forward to seeing the specifics when that comes down the line in December.
I had maybe one or two questions, but first little comment, could you make sure that little list of bullets that you just showed us shows up in the minutes? So we have a copy of that. And can I ask, what you're calling the escrow account, is that the same as what the draft agreement calls the operating reserve account?
Yep, that's right. Sorry. In the agreement, they've changed the language now to operating reserve account. Yep.
Okay. One little thing I was curious about, and I spent some time with you trying to comprehend your elaborate spreadsheet that you used to create these numbers, and I made some progress, but I by no means will say that I understand where all these numbers come from. But, and in Section 4, paragraph D, it talks about it says the partner's annual gross investment less the partner's proportional share of capital aid, federal aid, and state aid equals the partner's annual net investment. A partner which applies for and receives state aid directly for transit services that are provided by Metro will not receive state or federal aid as part of this contract. So, but my question is simply, since we're going to be talking about whether to accept state aid directly down the agenda a bit, and since that, if we do that, it seems to affect our proportional share of the costs of things. Is that something that you've calculated, that you've factored into your calculations?
Yep. So Metro is gracious enough to kind of do our calculations both with or without state aid, state and federal aid in this case. Basically, we have that comparison later on. That's that draft table I showed you before, and I have an updated one with some more recent numbers to show you today. But yeah, basically, this would be similar to Sun Prairie and Verona, that they're partners with Metro, but they don't receive state aid or federal aid through Metro. So, yep, we're subtracting out that and then applying to WISDOT for that separately. So.
Okay. We'll be talking about that in a minute. That issue of whether to take direct state aid. We don't need to act on this. It's a discussion item. So unless there's further discussion or questions, is there?
No, I'm good.
Okay, then we can move on with the agenda. We have some action items. Action item 8A, proposed TTC rule addition. This came up last time, and it was, action was postponed, which means we don't have to move the motion again. We're just going to proceed from where we were with a motion on the floor and seconded. But before we do that, I wanted to ask Andrew to summarize what he learned from consulting with the attorney.
Yeah, so I asked Valerie to take a look at this just to make sure, it was in line with kind of policies. And she said, although we do, as commissioners for the TTC, you do have the option to set your own policies, it should be consistent with Robert's Rules of Order. And I think the concern she had, and she reached out to a listserv of some other municipal attorneys as well, was that there's basically either kind of, you have to motion to approve each item individually or put it on a consent agenda to kind of do it in block, but we can't approve it and then do the discussion later on, basically. So I believe that was kind of the concern, that it wasn't consistent with Robert's Rules of Order, and that she kind of recommended if, and I believe, I kind of explained to her that really I think your main intention was just trying to work more efficiently, so that if we're going to talk about it, we just do it all at once, so we don't have to do each one. But I think she was just concerned that that wasn't consistent. And so if you have any questions, I can try to answer them, or I can direct them to Valerie.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Again, as I say, the motion is on the floor, so it's open for discussion. Troy?
The model for this is the way the city council does business. It has a prefixed agenda. They go right through it. They don't have to make a motion first before they discuss. And the idea for this is to prevent the awkward situation where we have been in several times where we end up discussing something and then we say, well, do we really need a motion or not? This just eliminates that step and, operates under basically the same assumption that the Common Council does.
Our
Okay.
county council?
So,
Fitchburg's?
Yes, Gabrielle, you had your hand up.
yeah, so actually, we do move every single thing in that. So we move through the agenda one by one in council, but after the consent agenda where we approve everything as a block. And to be clear, The consent agenda, most of the resolutions of the consent agenda, the approval is to move them forward to committees, except for typically things coming through public safety. So that would be like liquor license renewals and conditional use permits and things that are very simple and routine. We'll approve those without discussion. But then once we move into the regular agenda, which starts with new business, the list of different resolutions, because at council, there's not typically discussion items. It's pretty much just action items that we're actually voting on. And anytime there's an action item, a resolution or an ordinance that we have to vote on, it always starts with a motion and a second, and then discussion. So, yeah, and that's so typically what the mayor does is when we move to that, to whatever item requires a motion, which is almost everything for council, the mayor says, I need a motion for this resolution. Whoever decides to move that motion will actually say, I move approval of R dash da 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 da, and then they list out the entire name of the resolution. Once that's done, someone chooses to second it, and then we move into discussion.
Okay, Rich, do you have a comment?
No, I'm kind of wondering what we're trying to achieve here. I'm not a fan of having a common one okay for everything. Since I've been with Fitchburg, I've been on cable and broadband commissions, public works, plan commission, this one, library oversight. So I've seen how they're all a little bit different. And I asked our mayor the other day, I said, the plan commission runs really smooth. Is that spelled out anywhere? And he said, no, it's just the way it's always been. And it works really well because we go down the agenda, we get to an item, the staff will introduce it, just give a quick 2 cents worth or whatever. Then we get into the rest of the work of, let me back up. Sometimes we have input from the public too. But that's always worked very well. We sort of leave it up to the staff to set the table, and then we make a motion, and then we discuss.
Okay. So we've heard a summary of the attorney's comments. We've got some other comments here. Unless there's further discussion, I think we can take a vote on Troy's motion. So I'll ask all those in favor of approval indicate by saying aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Aye.
Nay.
So I heard 3 nays and 1 aye, so it does not pass. Action item 8B, direct staff to draft a resolution to identify any essential Fitchburg transit routes as part of Metro Transit Network redesign. And Andrew, could you give us a thumbnail sketch of what that's about?
Sure. As we kind of talked through some of those key decisions from some of the previous meetings, really where we're falling is that, as we know, Metro is, I'm just going to share my screen, is doing a network redesign study, and they'll be looking, they ran through each kind of the kind of 2 extreme versions, ridership or coverage. They have a survey, and now they're really taking all the responses they've heard and kind of over the next 2 months, developing a draft network. And so we'll likely see that in January, but what we have kind of been discussing is we'll certainly have a chance to talk, have public meetings, have the public weigh in, you guys can weigh in, the council, on any kind of essential transit areas that we might want to cover. But if we wanted to direct Metro to, include a specific area in that draft network, just to make sure that it gets included and kind of incorporated into future plans at this time, then this is really the time to do it. If either now, if you guys want to, if you want to direct, me to write a resolution to include some specific ones, and then in the November meeting, we can fine tune those and it can go to council. And so I guess I just want to make sure if you guys did want that, we had an opportunity to, voice that now, and I could draft a resolution for next month. And so, and just kind of talking through what that might look like. In some of our meetings with Metro, they're much better at this than me in terms of like drawing routes on the fly. But this is kind of a base model of kind of what the ridership network would look like. There's options to basically talk about other areas that we might want to serve. One idea that we recently had, for example, was, to have a route like this to come down past the Alliance Center, go kind of this way, come down and either go through the McCoy, Sain, or come down MM over to Lacey. And then similar to the 49 now, kind of come down East Sherrill over here and then circle around the Civic Center. So I know that this specific came up because I think at the last TTC, there was some kind of hope to get either the B line, in this case, down to the Civic Center area, or have another route. And so I guess I just kind of want to offer it to folks of, if there is kind of a desire to do that, maybe we could talk through that right now.
Okay. Well, I think it would be appropriate, first of all, to make a couple notes. I think whatever plan they come up with, it's always subject to change. I mean, this agreement includes language that allows amendments and changes, and they can change routes in the future. But I think it's important to get it as right as we can at the outset. And I think it'd be good for us, if there are specific preferred routes, essential routes, that we advance that to the council formally, that we get a motion and a second and put that forward to the council for you to include in your resolution. The one thing that I remember specifically is the thought that we should get a bus to come to City Hall, or come to the City Hall campus on a regular basis. I don't know how regular or how frequently, but at least we have some connection from here. Nobody heard me but you. So I'm not immortalized, but I'm asking if anyone on the commission would like to make a motion for a specific suggestion of an essential transit route to be added to whatever they're doing at this point. So that we do that, that we would get a motion and act on it right now, that we'd send that idea to the city council to be included in Andrew's resolution that he drafts. It'll come back to us to discuss and approve at some later time.
Can I make one point before we do
Yes.
that? So Andrew and I have been in some meetings where we discussed potential. So they have a network redesign. It's just the initial proposal based on ridership, prioritizing ridership, which means that fewer bus lines that are more frequent versus lots of bus lines that are less frequent, which is more what the system is now. And so they're working on adjusting Fitchburg's routes according to their network redesign with some tweaks potentially based on what we want. They were talking about, it was brought up, that connection between Fish Hatchery, where it ends around Hatchery Hill, and coming all the way down to City Hall. That is possible, certainly, but what happens is it's a very big increase in the cost.
Oh.
So, and they can only do back of the envelope calculations at this point, but because of the level of hours increased, you could be talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars of increase to extend that route from Hatchery Hill all the way down to City Hall campus, which is just the nature of those types of routes. So it's just something to consider. I think that it's worthwhile to say that we've discussed these, we think that this is something to consider, but I just want the committee to be aware that there's some significant budget implications. And right now, Madison Metro is trying to work so that the network redesign yields a result that's the same amount of service hours so that our budget is flat. Not that we couldn't make changes later, but for the initial redesign.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Do any buses come here currently?
Currently, the 49 commuter bus comes by here.
Is that daily, Monday through, or every day, or just?
Yeah, Monday through Friday, and then I believe it's the 59 on weekends comes, does the Target over to here route.
Okay.
I can pull up the existing.
I was just, way back when it was mentioned that we need bus service to the courtroom here because people lose their driver's license sometimes.
So, Gabrielle, is it your idea that our suggestion for Andrew's draft resolution be simply that there be some language in there saying that we've discussed this possibility and we'd like it to be in the mix of things considered, or as opposed to saying, no, we want the city council to push for that?
I mean, I consider it like a recommendation, and I certainly, so I communicate when my report for TTC to council, I communicate these types of discussions, even if they're not official motions. I kind of just review all the things that we've discussed. And if we decide to make specific recommendations about extensions of the routes that should be strongly considered, I think that that's valuable. I guess the thing I'm thinking is that I'm not sure that it would be a change to the network that is eventually proposed as part of a resolution to accept. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can bring it to the council as this is what TTC has discussed. We think that this would be the best thing for the community. But in terms of changing the network redesign, it's a little bit, it's hard to propose that if that's a significant increase beyond, above and beyond what the budget currently is.
Okay.
That's all I'm trying to say. Although I do think an official recommendation, if we think that that's what's best, has a lot of value.
Well, the issue at hand here is Andrew going to draft a resolution for the council to formally weigh in, reflecting our ideas. So if we don't ask Andrew to do that, I guess, I'm not sure what the course of events is. The Metro just continues on and produces a draft plan, and their process takes its course. This is really a question of, do we want to push our council a little bit in any specific way through a resolution that Andrew would draft? But to do that, I would say we need a motion here on the floor that says we want Andrew to do that we direct Andrew to do that.
A quick one. Why wouldn't it come to us first, once he's drafted the resolution and has all the data in one packet that we can digest? I would think it would want to go through the regular process where we're first and council's later.
It will. It's not. It won't go to. What will go to. What the draft resolution is initiates the formal process, as I understand this, by which the council works through us to create a recommendation to Madison Metro.
I'm good with that.
So I need if we're going to ask Andrew to do that, we need a motion to that effect. We need a motion to ask Andrew to identify, to draft a resolution to identify any essential Fitchburg transit routes as part of the redesign.
I'll move that we direct staff to draft resolution to identify any essential Fitchburg transit routes as part of the Metro Transit Network redesign.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second on that?
I guess I'm just hesitating a little bit because I'm a little bit unsure what the best process would be, because I just worry about the drafting of an official resolution. I think that an official recommendation that we vote on has a lot of value, but in terms of directing Andrew to create a resolution, I think it's a little bit early because the process is still ongoing and Metro hasn't finalized. There's a lot of integration with the entire network, trying to figure out service hours. Can they go on an hour cycle? Can they go on a half-hour cycle? That creates limitations in terms of what's even possible. So I'm just worried about the specific element of making it a resolution from Andrew. That's what I'm saying. Andrew, do you have any comments on this, or?
I mean, these are all good points. I would say, if you second, and then you could certainly amend it to just have me draft, a recommendation or something like that. That could, if you guys have specific areas, I could draft that so that you can approve it for next time. That could be another option if you want to soften some of the language. But
I'll second that.
So we do have a second. And is there any other further
Well,
discussion?
just, so we are voting on not a resolution, but a recommendation, correct?
Yeah, we're voting.
Okay.
I'll suggest a friendly amendment
okay.
to clarify that it's a recommendation to submit to council, but not a resolution.
Yeah, okay.
Right. It's just, we're really giving guidance to Andrew on how to proceed in this process, to engage the city formally in this process. That's how I understand that. Seeing no other discussion,
Well, I actually think it would be worthwhile for Andrew to just show because there's the 2 areas of town that are primarily affected, I guess 3 areas of town that are primarily affected, and that there are some nuances in terms of where the routes could go that have not been landed on. So this is very much a draft, but Andrew, do you kind of want to walk through the map a little bit before
Sure.
we make a final?
Yep. And yeah, I'm sorry, I should have done this at the onset, but this is daily existing routes, and just to kind of ground us. So the 49 was what I was talking about before, that currently comes, and they do have the peak and commuter routes on here as well. The kind of network redesign doesn't have those commuter routes shown, but they will still be back. So like the 75, for example, comes from Verona, Epic Campus, up through Fitchburg and to downtown. So that's still going to be there, and existing in future. The 49 shown here, that's a commuter route. The 40 comes down from the south transfer point. It does these loops in different patterns, depending on which time it comes down, and then always does this fish hatchery loop and comes back. The 18 is really the west to south transfer point connector, and that comes through Fitchburg in these areas and kind of goes along the Beltline frontage roads. The 16 goes from the south to the east transfer point currently, and it dips down into town of Madison and then a little bit of city of Fitchburg and then comes back. And then the 52 goes from the west transfer point down to the shopping center through King James Way in Williamsburg and Whitney, and then back up. And I will note that we are currently paying for all of that because we're kind of overlapping with Madison Metro service, so we're paying from west transfer point all the way down here. So just a quick aside on that. And those are really the main routes. I don't think I'm forgetting any of them. And so that's the existing. I do have the kind of ridership model here, and I just use this. I can also bring up the coverage network as well, but just as a base. And sorry, I thought I was sharing my screen earlier when I was describing that route, but that's what you see in green as kind of an optional route I just drew up. But I guess I mainly mean that the B is really this BRT line, the south BRT line that was originally going to at least come down to the south transfer point. Now is shown in the ridership models coming all the way down to Cahill and Caddis in that area on Fish and coming back. The G, you can kind of see. So the G, really is going a long way. It's going all the way from West Town. If I scooch over there, it goes all the way around Monona and back up. So really, that's a very extended route. And it does dip down in kind of, Greenway, and that's kind of City of Madison, City of Fitchburg area. The E loops around Target, continues out. This is really the start of the line, continues around Target, kind of goes up the frontage road, the Verona frontage roads, and dips into the City of Fitchburg here, and then back into the City of Madison. That heads up to University, and then down to Region, and then into downtown and back. And so you can see, with the ridership model, these are a lot more direct routes. They're not going to the transfer point necessarily, they're going into downtown or another place. And so those are really the main ones, and I guess I can also bring up the coverage of kind of what that might look like. So in coverage, G looks very similar, but it is going to more of a transfer point here. So this would be the west transfer point. So the transfer points basically still exist in the coverage network. And then so the G would kind of dip down, similar to the 18 now, and go from the west to south. The 95 would be similar to the 40 now. It would kind of come down, loop around here, and come back. The 94 would go through the town of Madison, which would then at that point be City of Fitchburg. Come down. It has quite a bit of kind of dead time in here, where there's there certainly would be stops, but there's not a whole lot of development. Gets into kind of industrial posts, crosses, and it could cross either into this area or head up Fish Hatchery and go back to the South Transfer Point. So those are kind of the coverage routes. I will note that there's also the 96, which, so this would be so just to orientate everybody, blue is the 30-minute headway, so you expect a bus every 30 minutes. Red is 15 minutes. So during the course of the day, I think from 6 till 8 at night, you're expecting every 15 minutes. Blue is 30 minutes, and then green is 60 minutes. So, if you miss your bus, you're gonna have to wait 60 minutes to get on the next one, but it does still provide that less walking to the bus. And so you can see, similar route that it would, go through Target, come up Williamsburg Way, and King James, head over on the frontage roads, dip into the city of Fitchburg, and then that one goes up to the West Transfer Point. So, with the coverage model, there's, it's much more similar to the existing conditions where a lot of these routes are kind of circling through Fitchburg and going to transfer points. Then you can kind of continue on, for example, at the South Transfer Point onto the B line and get some service into downtown. But, there's less direct routes and less frequent service, generally speaking. And so I guess I'll go back to ridership. Just to kind of reiterate that I think there are a few options, for example, as Gabriella said, that it could be costly to bring, for example, 15-minute headways, so a bus every 15 minutes down to the Civic Center area. It might be more realistic to try to extend a different route, like an hourly route this way, or or potentially do half frequencies on the B, if that's possible, in order to get service down there. I think that would be tricky, just because there's not a whole lot of other areas to serve, and it doesn't really extend that far out to justify kind of that. But I guess this is all just to say, if there's an area like Civic Center or someplace on McKee that the TTC really wants to focus on, I can give that back to them and say, hey, just make sure that this area gets due consideration in the draft network plan that we'll all see in January. So with that, I'll stop talking.
Okay, thank you. Now, so this is all a work in progress. At some point, they'll have a further developed ridership map and a further developed coverage map. The two options will be further developed, I gather.
I don't think so. I think they're going to take any feedback from the cities, any feedback on the survey, and make one draft network. Basically, is going to combine some of these coverage and ridership routes.
Okay, so the next thing the city would see is a unified plan that takes the best of both of them somehow. So the city has an opportunity to weigh in formally on that through a council action. And that's what the purpose of that earlier resolution was, to get you to draft something so that we can push the council to take a specific voice on some essential routes. That's how I understand what we're doing. And I know, a huge amount of thought and work has gone into this on the part of Metro and people here before I was involved on the commission. So this is not just a dart thrown at the wall. This reflects a lot of thought already.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gabrielle.
So and taking a step back, because, it's interesting, this regional network was never designed as a whole. It was designed piecemeal over time, especially as the regional area has grown. So the purpose of this network redesign is really to completely rethink it. And so with the Metro is leaning towards the ridership model, which was very much a change because you get rid of transfer points. That's true, Andrew, right? Isn't the...
Yep.
It gets rid of transfer points. So the idea is to have fewer routes that are more frequently run, that direct people where they're most likely to go. So basically, it doesn't cover as many people, but the people that it does cover, or that choose to get to that route through other means, biking or driving and parking, it's very functional for them because they can get in and out of the city, for example, the city of Madison very easily. And so that's what they're leaning towards. My initial reaction to that was a little bit of worry about the lack of coverage. But that's really the policy decision, and that's where the redesign has gone. And I do think there's a lot of value in that. Speaking, because I think a lot of people are using this to get to jobs, and more frequent routes is a good way to make sure that people make that happen. But I think what is a little bit, when I looked at these early maps, I think what's nerve-wracking is like before some of these routes really wove through neighborhoods,
Yeah.
and now they're going to be aligned on major roads. So there is some potential big changes for people that use the network regularly. Now, if they can make it work to get to those maybe stops that are a little farther away, maybe they're going to get to where they need to go a lot faster.
Yeah.
So I think that's where like the nuance comes in. So like this is the base map, but if they choose to, if they really need to divert the route into, so for example, the G, right now that doesn't go down to Post Road, right? Post Road is is a very well-used like route, and there's a lot of multifamily housing in there.
Yeah, yeah.
But right now, from the old map, it did go to Post Road. With the new map, the initial draft, it doesn't go down to that way. So the question is that an important area to make sure that hits? Like what is the concern there? And I know over in in the west side of town, it used to cycle through the Jamestown neighborhood, King James Way area, Williamsburg Way, and now the route is going to be centered on Anton Drive, which is along that row of stores, the Mounds Pets Food and the Little John's that's coming, versus kind of a more weaving through the neighborhoods. So those are the type of pain points that I think are where the growing pains will be. And I think that if we have concerns about a specific area, now is the time to say, I think this is important to make sure we try to get these routes to hit these places. So I hope that kind of gives you a broader perspective.
Right. Which I think is the underlying reason to try to get the council to have some resolution to that effect, and that we get to discuss it and weigh in. I noticed you added some routes there with your magic pen, Andrew. What were those lines?
Yeah, so just as Gabriella was speaking, I just want to make sure, I was trying to reflect what she was describing. So, I think there could be an option where the G would dip down to Post and basically head up, and kind of follow the rest of it. So I know that's generally pretty tapped out, but I think it is possible to do that to some degree based upon some conversations with Metro. So that certainly might be a possibility, and that would both serve, City of Fitchburg and City of Madison with some of that high-density housing there in Post. Right. I think that's currently our busiest stop.
So what is where it's going across, what street is that? Where G goes horizontally right there, yeah?
Oh, sure, that's the Beltline Frontage Road.
That's the Beltline Frontage.
And then that comes down, I believe, Coho to Greenway, and then comes back up on Fish Hatchery.
I could see that, and right now there is coverage on Post Road, and so we're losing that under that plan.
This is what the 40 does currently. And so, I think how they originally drafted that G route kind of mimics what the 18 does. It just kind of comes down Coho and comes back up. But there could be a more extensive, either taking Todd Drive or Grandview, I believe. It'd probably be Todd, but.
Well, these are tough decisions. I believe these are hard decisions and complicated decisions. And I just want to defer to people like Gabriella that have already spent a lot of time thinking about these things, and the transit people, the Metro people have spent a lot of time. But these are important decisions for real people of how they get to where they need to go.
If I may.
Go ahead.
One other thing I wanted to note too is that the timeline on this is a little bit longer than I had originally thought. So obviously they're working on this network, they're trying to get a final design to be accepted, but the actual implementation of it won't start until probably at least a year out from now, and possibly closer to a year and a half. So there is some lead time in terms of communicating with the public about changes. And changes can also additionally be made. If we want to spend more money on our transit system, we can add routes that hit the neighborhoods that we don't have, or we can go down from all the way down Fish Hatchery to Lacey. It just requires more of an investment. And that might be more possible with the state aid, because we're looking at $50,000 to $100,000 of additional funding. We could use that funding to fund additional routes. But I do think that that lead time actually gives us an opportunity to do communication with the public and make sure that people know what's coming and hear what they think about what's down the line.
I would like to see down the line buses going by the schools. So we've got Savannah Oaks, and we got the grade school out there, and we've got the one over here. And I think that would be a big benefit. People could take the bus for after-school activities, but that's not really addressed in any of these, is it?
Currently, there's not an all-day route that goes, by Seminole and Lacey. And I believe, right now, the main, and I will say in the existing conditions, there's also not one. So that we're not losing that necessarily in this network redesign, but I believe the justification was just that that's generally lower density, so that would really be the big draw to kind of bring a route down there.
And of course, we're not even looking at the map of what's going on over in the part of town of Rona that we're going to take over and all that area. That's got to be very important too for a lot of people.
Yeah, the town of Madison will have budget implications, and I believe that's incorporated into the 2022 proposed budget. But it'll be even higher the following year, because we're absorbing it in October of next year versus the following year will be a full year of town of Madison. And there's route changes there as well. Well, again, it's the current plan is to align it along Rimrock Road, whereas before it wove into the neighborhoods back there.
Well, this is a discussion that could lead on to more discussion. At this point, have we said enough on this item? Okay, thank you. So we did direct staff to develop a resolution for council.
Or a recommendation.
Recommendation.
Yeah.
You guys need to.
We're up to resolution.
I think we need to take a vote if we want to make it an official
Oh, I
recommendation.
thought we did have a vote on that. I'm sorry. I apologize. All those it was moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 That's, everybody said aye. So we have unanimous approval of that. Item C, Resolution R 19121, approving Fitchburg becoming a Tier B direct recipient of 85.20 transit operating assistance. Andrew, give us a thumbnail sketch on what that's about.
Yeah, so this is kind of that confusing note that we talked a little bit about in the last two meetings. So basically, as I kind of included in the referral slip, that currently we receive our operating assistance both from the federal government and the state via Tier 1 transit funding through Metro. So basically, Metro lays out their routes the year prior in December. They submit an application to WSDOT that includes our service, and then they pass on the transit assistance that they get from the state and feds to us, proportional to our service hours. And so that's not the only way to do it. Basically, some partners that joined later kind of use Metro more like a vendor, so they would apply directly to WSDOT for transit assistance for the service hours that they, for their partner contribution to Metro for the service hours they get. And so those are kind of the two different ways. It mainly has cost implications, and I can kind of talk through that a little bit. So I'll just share my screen. And so this is a slightly updated version. So this is included in your packet, but slightly updated from what we had done previously with kind of the draft. And there was one mistake that we caught from that, so that's now been corrected. But I can kind of just walk down there's basically 3 points. This is primarily going to go through the cost implications in terms of our annual budget versus, with direct state funding versus our current default method, kind of status quo funding through Metro. And I can talk a little bit about the other items as we go. So basically, vehicle hours, stays the same. Basically, this estimate right here is our 2019 pre-COVID numbers plus half of the town of Madison's 2019 pre-COVID numbers. So it's a big wild guess right now. It's definitely going to change depending upon what the network study says, but so far it's looking somewhat based upon Metro's preliminary calculations. So going off of that number, we can kind of start calculating some of our raw operating expenses. So this is coming directly from Metro. Basically, if they annualize their capital costs and add in their operating costs, and then divide all that by the number of hours, and then we get our share by multiplying that figure by the number of hours we have. And these are kind of the two different numbers, and there is slight differences here, but I'll note, it's like $2,000. It's really trivial. So, and I think those are just kind of calculations. So that is largely the same in one version or the other. So that's again our raw. Our net does start to change, and really the difference here is that our net actually goes up in Metro's eyes because they're not subtracting off that state and federal operating assistance from our raw cost. And so to Metro, our cost goes up. But then we'll basically take that larger number and go to the state and say, can we get operating assistance on that? And so that's really where the number comes down later on. I do have the escrow balance in here, and so under these current assumptions, they're largely similar, so the escrow kind of stays very similar. But just jumping down to here, you will see that basically this escrow as percent of budget, really we're dividing the escrow divided by what that kind of net operating cost is. And so even though they're similar, raw or absolute figures relatively, basically that's, I guess, the second implication is that our escrow requirement goes up because in Metro's eyes, our net operating cost goes up. So that's just a quick caveat. So basically, we're going to be tied to having a larger escrow account because of their 25% requirement. And but the good news is that after taking state funding, which we're estimating right now to be roughly 53% of our net operating cost, and that is, I will say, conservative. I believe that it actually can be taken off of our raw operating costs. But just to be conservative, we're taking off our net, so that's basically, we're getting less money, assuming that. You can kind of see so this is our current status quo. 2022, let's just focus on. So $57 per every service hour we get from Metro. Before state funding is applied, so this would be what Metro sees, the bill that we get from Metro would be $107 per hour. And then we will take that bill and apply for state and federal funding and get that reduction down to 50. And so really that's where, all of these numbers just kind of play out to our final budget contribution, which is, basically with, status quo, we're at roughly, this is what we include in the budget, $620,000 annually. With the state aid option, direct state aid, we would be less than that, roughly $25,000 less than that. And so that varies depending upon the year, but we're likely at something like $25,000 to $100,000 of savings annually by doing direct transit assistance through WISTA. So, sorry, I know that's a lot. Feel free to ask questions, but.
Should we make a motion then, now that the intro is over?
Yes, a motion would be in order to support or reject this resolution.
I move approval of R 19121, approving Fitchburg becoming a Tier B direct recipient of 85.20 transit operating assistance.
I'll second.
I have a second from Rich.
And I do have a comment too, if that's.
Okay, so your comment then?
Yeah, so just for context too, this was mentioned last time at the Metro presentation at our last meeting, but one of the reasons for this is because Tier B cities are basically, Tier A cities, which is Madison and Milwaukee, are basically penalized for state funding. And so we're getting pass-through funding of the state aid through Metro, and because they're Tier A, they're getting less overall. But because we're a Tier B, we basically get a better deal on the state funding, which is why this ends up being advantageous to both us as a city and also advantageous to the regional network as a direct result. Ideally, every regional city outside of the city of Madison, if they all applied for state funding separately, the regional system as a whole would have a larger influx of state funding. Right. So it's good for everybody involved, and it saves us money. And the one downside is additional staff time to administer the actual program. Yeah. But Andrew and I think our finance director are confident that the staff can make it work to get this extra influx of state funding.
Okay, good.
Sorry, just a quick note, and this is new, so that's the only reason I bring it up, but that basically the only other downside would be that necessity to kind of keep a larger escrow. And again, it gets a little confusing, but to Madison, our net operating cost is going up. And so to keep 25% of that on hand, that would just mean that basically, you can see in 2025, we would be nearing that. Our escrow should be going up after that, so it shouldn't be a problem. But basically, we'll need to keep, a larger share in that escrow moving forward because of that. So those, I think, are the two downsides: is just a slight amount additional staff time and a larger absolute value escrow. And the benefit is less cost annually.
Okay, but I guess I understand that the escrow fund has to be kept at a larger level. So that just means we're paying sooner than later for whatever is paid for with that escrow fund. I mean, it's not that doesn't imply greater cost to the city in the long run, or does it?
I think it would depend, but yeah, basically we're just saying that, for example, if we increase our service hours in the future, we'll have to increase a larger share in order to get that escrow balance up. So basically we're at 25%, and so, if you, let's say, wanted to add 10% more of your of service, so we would basically have to increase our escrow funding to match that, so that we're not dipping below the 25% of our annual contribution.
I mean, my impression from reading this draft agreement was the point of the escrow fund is that there will always be 3 months worth of money in that escrow fund that Metro can rely on. But that shouldn't affect the cost to the total long-term cost to the city shouldn't be affected by that requirement, I wouldn't think.
That's right, but I guess, like, if it really has no effect if we stay at our current number of service hours. I guess I just mean to bring it up of if we were ever to increase our service hours, there'd be a one-time cost to make sure that we're increasing that escrow amount. And so that's, I guess, the only, it still is in our fund, right? But it would just be, we would have to kind of section that off into our escrow account.
So if we get more service hours, we're going to have to pay for it, which would be the case anyway.
Exactly, yep. Or to put more money into the rainy day fund, I guess, in that case, is all I mean to bring up.
All right, so we've had a motion and a second, and is there any more discussion of this resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. That was unanimous. So moving on to Resolution R 19221. And Andrew, just a thumbnail sketch of what this is about.
Sure. So this is the follow-up to our Wesley Road reconstruction project. Right now we're at 60% plans, and along with that, we have our transportation project plat. So we've done all the kind of vertical design, and now we know what our limits to construction are going to be. And so that both includes temporary easements and permanent easements. And so this is really the plat, similar to a development plat, that we're just identifying what areas, how we're kind of divvying up these areas and what areas we're going to need for the roadway project. And so with this will go to Plan Commission and go to Council for approval, basically just to make sure that we have authority to approach these property owners and start negotiating for their land. And I just want to note that, consistent with some of the discussions earlier and kind of the general direction of trying to keep this footprint as small as possible, we're not taking any full parcels here, just kind of slivers in order to get the path, the water main, and some of the other smaller elements. And obviously I guess the biggest element here is the easements for the stormwater facilities.
Okay, and just one little point, even though it's called a relocation order, nobody is being relocated. So we need a motion to launch this. Can I have a motion to approve or reject?
I move approval of R 19221, approving the relocation order and TPP related to the construction of Lacey Road from Fitchburg Road to the Badger State Trail.
I'll second.
We have a second from Rich. Is there any further discussion?
So in terms of the residents that were concerned about the design, does this like 60% design deviate significantly from what we looked at the outset of the project? Once we got to that cross section that we voted on.
Would it help if I showed the 60% plans?
Yes, please.
Okay. Sure, so I can definitely show them, and just to kind of note that this is largely what we shared at the second public meeting at the end of August.
Wow.
And so just kind of walking through, I'll start on that west side. And so what you'll see is really our basin for the west side. So, the hill at Commerce Park is really where all the water kind of deviates. And so this is, all the water in the western portion of the project comes here and is treated in this facility. Zooming in on the actual reconstruction. So we do still have the trees noted here, and the orange is the stormwater. And so, you're seeing small traffic islands here, the buffered bike lanes, and single lane of vehicle traffic. There are left turn bays here. Moving further east, I'll note, we did spend a lot of time trying to make this cross-section as narrow as possible, so we can avoid going into the slope. Unfortunately, so previously we had a desire to extend what this will be a future Legend Rock Road. Currently it goes in the quarry on the north side. Previously our plan was to extend it south here, and basically it just worked a lot better with the grades. We didn't want to do this because basically we would have to drop the road down further here in order to not make this driveway too steep. We like to maintain an 8% slope if possible. And so basically because of that, we had to drop the roadway section through this whole area because we basically, this property of Payne & Dolan owns this, another entity owns this, and we weren't able to figure out a way to get that connection as part of this project. And so that will be a future connection. But during this time, we have changed the roadway elevation here. Unfortunately, on the downside of that is that means we're going further into the slope and taking more trees. we will be saving some trees likely on the south side in order to avoid kind of cutting into this. So, but granted, those are evergreen trees that were planted much after this this forest. So that's definitely the downside. This left turn bay in the short term will act as kind of a two-stage crossover for large trucks. So they'll come out of the quarry here, use this, and then kind of shift over and go into and be weighed down here. So that was definitely kind of the bad news compared to the earlier, and that honestly wasn't something that we wanted to do. It just was something that was necessary because we couldn't get the access to make those grades work. Working further east, so this is the intersection at Commerce Park. We have a left turn bay and a deceleration right turn bay. There was a comment about trying to make this as pedestrian and bicycle friendly as possible. We're definitely looking at potentially some green pavement markings here in order to do that and basically increase the visibility of that crossing. Working further east, it goes down and narrows here. And so this looks considerably different than what we showed at the first meeting. So this is a more linear feature. And this is really, I guess, the win in terms of, or the big kind of positive change out of all the design outreach efforts is, this was really defined as an area that, had that rural character, trees that we could potentially save. We probably won't be able to save all of them, certainly the south side. They're quite damaged with the power lines going through them. So those will all go. We'll probably lose one or two of these, but we're hoping to save a few of these and then plant more trees in this area. And so really, we did some path deviation here to kind of be able to have a small kind of water retention area here, and then areas to plant more trees and kind of have kind of roadway beautification. This is our stormwater facility, our kind of 4 bay, and then the wet pond here before it goes in a kettle. And then we have the left turn bays identified here for the future Edgewood development. And then it kind of transitions back, and then really right at the Badger State Trail is where this project ends. So we won't, the TPP doesn't include any of this additional work over here that we'll be doing with a follow-up project of the roundabout design, which we'll probably see in a couple months.
Now, is the land to be acquired by eminent domain on both sides of the road, or just on the north side, just on the south? Where is the land that's going to be acquired, the strips?
Yeah, so this is really this is the transportation project plat. You can see parcel number here and what type we're requiring. And so PLE means permanent limited easement, and so that's going to be most of our stormwater facilities are going to be that. So basically, we have a right to have water there, but we still do not own the land. TLE is that temporary limited easement. That's really just for construction grading. And then the FEE is where we would be permanently buying that land. And so, I can kind of walk through, this hatch is really those fee areas. And so this is basically an area that we would be buying specifically on the north side to be able to put that path there. We have an easement on the north side for all of Payne and Dolan's land and all of Promega's land further east that specifically allows us to put path and utilities in that area, so we don't need to buy that land. And so down here, this is all PLE in order to get this stormwater facility. So currently, this will be a permanent limited easement that will be, from Payne and Dolan. In the future, when they develop this area, this will be a public outlot that will be dedicated to the city. And so that'll be kind of a temporary condition before that gets permanently dedicated to us. So most of these areas are TLE. Again, this is just, we're trying to match that existing slope. So at that 3-to-1 slope, and in certain areas, it takes a longer time to do that. So that would be temporary easement. In these areas, again, we'd be, matching up the slope, clearing the trees and then matching into existing slope. And then there's a second page. And so you can kind of see commerce here. I'll go to the second page where it shows it better. And so in this area, we have some small slivers. basically where our easement, our kind of path, utility easement doesn't cover. And so in these areas, we'll be buying fee, so we'll be permanently buying these areas. Basically, the way these worked out was just, we need this area for the right turn bay and to basically get trucks through here. So we kind of shifted the road out in order to get trucks in there. And they fall within the utility easement there that we don't own, the private utility easement. So that's why we're going to be doing fee and then asking them to vacate those areas. And then along this stretch of Promega's land, this will be all temporary easements. These driveways are all temporary easements just for grading. And then these are really the big stormwater facilities. So as I mentioned, the forebay and the wet pond is in this one. This large permanent easement is mainly for the two stormwater outfalls here and here. That basically will add additional runoff to this area. And so we just want to be fair and have a permanent easement to allow us to do that on private property. And then similarly here, we'll have some stormwater facilities in here and then the path as well. So those are kind of our three big PLE areas, and then all this on the south side, adjacent to the O'Brien facility, currently O'Brien land, potential future Edgewood property would be a temporary easement. And I know it's tough because we don't have the arrow on, but hopefully that all made sense.
And there are a couple of homes on the south side there. One of them appears abandoned, or at least overgrown. How are those properties affected?
Yeah, so that's these properties. It's just a temporary easement to get their driveway reconstructed to the new grade. So really pretty minorly affected.
Okay. Okay. Is there any other discussion of this resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. That's unanimous. And we've worked our way down to R 19521, authorizing the intersection of Lacey and Seminole to be controlled by a roundabout. And of course, we've discussed this, and in general terms, we've indicated support in the past. Andrew, did you want to add anything before we get a resolution, or get a motion on this?
No, I mean, basically, you're totally right. This is, I think, last time you approved the design resolution with the recommendation for a roundabout. I think council wanted a little bit more time just to make sure we got back out to the public. So this is coming back specifically now just for the intersection control.
Right. So, all right. With that, is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve Resolution R 195-21.
Thank you, Rich. Second?
Second.
Second, thank you, Gabriela. Is there any further discussion or comment or questions about this resolution?
I have a comment. I have grown up with roundabouts living in Europe, and the ones that work well are the ones that have an exit lane. And I noticed that I like this. One thing is that two of the directions actually have an exit lane to keep you off that middle one. So I would prefer to see it where every exit had a lane, so that when you're trying to get on, you know whether the guy's coming in front of you or behind you. But I like this. I'm glad to see that.
Okay. All right, thank you. Other comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval of this resolution indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye, that's unanimous. Moving on, resolution R 19621. And Andrew, this is one I need to just explain to me, this new idea.
Sure. So we had our second public meeting on South Sayin at the end of September. And through that design process and over 9 small group meetings, we talked about a lot of things, but one of them that we kept coming back to was the intersection control out there at East Sherrill and South Sayin. And so I can definitely, I can show you now, or I can show you later, but might as well show you now. This is the current intersection control. It's an always stop out there at Siena and East Sherrill. I have the future volumes on here so you can kind of see what we're dealing with. They're here. So I think the biggest movements are this southbound right turn, the southbound through, the eastbound through. Those are kind of some of the biggest ones. We also have some of the other northbounds, in the AM. And so what you're seeing here is all the numbers not in parentheses are AM peak volumes, peak hour volumes. The numbers in parentheses are PM peak hour volumes. And so unfortunately, with an always stop control with 2045 volumes, we'd be looking at an overall level of service in the AM peak of E, and then PM peak of F. And so really, we're just talking about long delays here. This shows the queue lengths, and so in some cases, mainly the biggest one is southbound through and left volumes. We'd be looking at 800 feet. So each car is 20 feet long. You can kind of do the math of how many cars that is. And so unfortunately, because of that, it's not really an option to leave this as an all-way. And so with the roadway reconstruction project, we started to find some options. And so the initial two options were a roundabout and a traffic signal, just kind of generically. So I think initially in the design study, before we started designing, they looked at a single lane and a two lane. A two lane, based upon the most recent traffic modeling, we don't think that's necessary. So really, we're at a single lane roundabout and a traffic signal. And so those are shown here, but now we have two flavors of a traffic signal. So you're all familiar with the single lane roundabout. We would be connecting the path on the west side, similarly to what we've talked about on Lacey and Seminole. We have cycle tracks on the east side that we'd be connecting to a path. And so, it's very, it's a traditional design. We have on-street facilities transitioning to off-street at the roundabout and then back to on-street or cycle tracks. And then the traditional signal, we also have plenty of these. Basically, for the most part, we have on-street bike facilities. And in some cases, we wouldn't, just if we have low right turning volumes. And so, I think generally folks have been interested in this because they want to make sure they have a dedicated pedestrian phase, and there's some concern about kind of negotiating conflicts with the roundabout. And I can definitely get to the pros and cons in a little bit. But that was kind of the initial thought on the signal. All operate very well in 2045 volumes. So they're all, when constructed A, and in 20 years, either a B or a C. And so, there's a slight degradation of the level of service with the roundabout. And then the other variety that folks were interested in the small group meetings and at the public meeting and on the survey was the protected intersection. So this is a little bit newer of a design. I don't believe there is one in Wisconsin, but essentially it is a traditional signal, but with these teardrop islands. And so kind of the novelty here is that as drivers turn around these teardrop islands, they're forced to go a little bit slower. Basically, that radius is reduced, and so they have to go a little bit slower, and they tee up, and so they have higher visibility with these bike lanes and crosswalks. And so it's really just kind of additional comfort and safety for cyclists and pedestrians crossing. And if you're a cyclist coming through here, you would be transitioned off of an on-street facility onto a cycle track, or at least a protected bike lane. So we could do this a number of different ways, and so we'll be kind of working through that if this is indeed the preferred alternative to make sure that these can still be maintained and they're at the best cost for benefit ratio. But as you're biking along, you would basically get up to this stop bar. Can you guys see that? I'll do the hand. So you'll be biking along. There's yield markings here, just as you're crossing the kind of pedestrian crossing here. And then you come up here to stop here. So on green, as a bicyclist, you would continue through the intersection here and then continue on your way. If you want to take a left turn, you would then stop here and wait for this associated green. And so basically they're kind of in their protected cycle track the whole time. That's where the name comes from, protected intersection. And you know, we can do that same thing on, and really this is the justification for this, that instead of having a through bike lane and a path, we're basically combining those two and kind of putting them all over here. And we can do nice things like protect the right turns here then. So basically we would give the bikes and pedestrians the first go at the intersection, either with a leading interval or with a fully isolated phase, and then have the right turners come on after that. And so that kind of it both slows down the conflicts and allows us some signal timing flexibility to isolate those two conflicts. And so those are, you know, again, it's not totally revolutionary. It's just a traffic signal with some new features for added comfort and safety for cyclists. And so I think one of the big things, I can certainly talk a little bit more in discussion time about some of the pros and cons, but one of them was, you know, with a potential quick trip coming in there, I think a lot of folks were interested in, you know, the overwhelming kind of comment I heard was folks were interested in walking there, sending their kids there, and they want to make sure it's something that was safe there. And so I can certainly hit on the pros and cons that I provided in the packet, or I can wait until discussion.
This, did we do a motion to approve yet? We need one. We need a motion to move this forward.
I move to approve.
Okay, thank you. Troy, any second?
Second.
Gabriella, thank you. With that, we're open for discussion and comment, or any other further questions? Gabriella?
I just have so I was looking at a image, I just searched on Google Images so I could see a non-AutoCAD image of it for visualization. So with that teardrop shape, basically what it allows to do is it allows the cars to stop for pedestrians without being in the intersection. Is that kind of the rationale behind it?
Yep, that's correct. So it tees them up and it gets them out of the through lane so that through vehicles can still proceed.
Yeah, that's interesting. Obviously I haven't seen it because it's apparently not in Wisconsin. So, but it seems like a great way to protect pedestrians. If you all have a chance to search it on your computers, it's a lot easier to understand it through just a Google image search.
I had a question. One of the pros of the roundabout is reduction in right-angle crashes. Is it your belief that in fact the roundabout is safer than the protected intersection option?
That's a good question, and it's always tough not having an intersection compared to. So right now it's an all-way, so it's relatively safe. I would say a roundabout would likely reduce the number of serious injury crashes there associated with broadside collisions. So if we have a signal, somebody will run it eventually, and that may end up in a higher speed broadside or right angle collision. And so roundabouts are great at reducing that. We get side swipe and rear end collisions, but not the broadsides. And so from my opinion, if, in terms of future broadside collisions, it will definitely reduce those. I believe that the roundabout does suffer to some small degree, just depending upon driver expectations in terms of bicycle and pedestrian crashes. It's certainly safe. Folks are going slower than they would going through just a traffic signal with a green light. But there is kind of that hesitancy with not knowing if somebody's going to stop, and so I guess it's primarily comfort on the protected intersection, but I do think that there's a slight edge to safety as well, with just slowing people down on both left and right turns, and making sure that cyclists and pedestrians are visible. So.
A comment, question.
Rich?
With the protected intersection, the cost is 1.1 to 1.5. Why such a range?
Yeah, so I guess we wanted to reflect kind of the risk with this kind of novelty of an intersection, knowing that it has been done here. That there's just some associated, with anything new, there's going to be some costs. The range was really associated with, and the primary components here are kind of handwork for those curb, like all the curb and concrete in the teardrop islands. But there's a big range if we want to carry the cycle tracks out the whole distance as shown in the diagrams, or if we want that to just be pavement with some concrete, precast blocks separating traffic. So I guess we just want to reflect the range that it doesn't have to be 500K more than a traditional signal. There's definitely a possibility that we can do this for much less money, but I think there's just some discomfort knowing that it's new and knowing not exactly what's going to go into it, that we want to make sure we have that range reflected.
I have another question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe this is a simple question, but is this going to be controlled by a light then, or is it still going to be a four-way stop?
Yep, it still would be a traffic signal, and so we'd have phasing specifically. As I kind of noted earlier, that the right turns we could run kind of sequentially, so they wouldn't be running at the same time as through vehicles if we have that right turn bay. So yes, they're both signals. One's just a more traditional signal, and the other one's protected. Does that make sense? Sorry. I hope.
Actually, I didn't understand that.
Okay. Yep. I can. I'll try to pull up a diagram. I feel like that usually helps me. Yeah. So in each case, we have the traditional stop bars. So they're both controlled by traffic signals. It's just that in this case, basically the right turners are going a little bit slower. We do have, in either case, we have options for controlling when bicycles and pedestrians go in the crosswalks. But in the more traditional case, we would just have, on-street bike lanes, and they would just go with the associated green movements, in like everyday conditions. So hopefully that makes sense. They're both signals. This one gives us a little bit more flexibility with how we phase the through vehicles and left turn vehicles associated with kind of a combined bike and ped around the perimeter. Does that make sense?
Just curious, did you get, you had 9 meetings, 9 small group meetings?
Yeah, I like to say they weren't all about this, but
Right.
We certainly did talk about
The whole Cyan Road project.
Yep.
And 2 public information meetings. Did you get comment specifically from the bike committee, the city's, or the bike organization here? I know you said there's a comment here that the approval from residents primarily due to its bicycle and pedestrian-friendly elements, but did our bike community weigh in on this and say, this is better?
I don't believe that we had official representation from Bike Fitchburg. Steve was included on the small resident group, but I think he was just representing himself, saying that he was in favor of either the protected signal or the roundabout. I will say we did talk about this at the bike committee meetings, I think the last 2 times, and we didn't get any official weighing in, but we certainly discussed kind of the elements, and so, but I don't have kind of a referendum on whether they approve one option or the other.
So, I mean, just curious, how many people total, how many different people came to these 9 meetings?
I mean, our small group is roughly 16 people, and so, give or plus or minus, most of those same people were represented at both the first and second public meeting, and so I would say unique individuals were probably looking at 20 to 25.
That's pretty impressive to me. That seems like a lot of people, a lot of interest. Okay, so we have a motion to approve this in a second, and we've had a little discussion. Are there any further comments about it? I'm never quite sure how to weigh cost. As a transportation committee, I don't think cost is our issue. I think, functionality, design, service to the transportation plan and so on. But it does look like this might be a bit more expensive than the alternative. And my sense from what you just said is that the local interest that's pretty significant. I think, get 25 people to come out. But they may not have all been interested in this specific aspect of it, because they were talking about the whole Sign Road project, I assume. And there's been some controversy, I know, over there, and some concerns. Well, so with that, I think we're ready to vote. All those in favor of approving this, say aye.
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 Opposed? No, I don't approve. I would prefer the roundabout, so that'll go 3-1. Are there other announcements? That's item 9 on our agenda. Hearing none.
Sorry.
Oh.
I just want to give a quick update, if that's okay.
Yep.
There was a recent email from, sorry, hang on just 1 second while I pull it up. The Connect Greater Madison Regional Transportation Plan 2050.
Thank you. Yes.
There are public meetings coming up in November. One is going to be on November 11th, Thursday, from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m., and then another one on Tuesday, November 16th, from 12 to 1 p.m.
Okay.
I can send out this email to everybody in case you have. You might have already gotten it, but if you haven't, I can forward this to
I
Transportation.
appreciate that, Gabrielle. I got it, and I meant to make a comment on that also, so I appreciate you bringing that up. And I
Yeah.
think if you could circulate that to, many of us got it, but some didn't, so.
Yep, I can definitely send that out. And then my second thing was, I just wanted to mention that the Madison budget process is or the Fitchburg budget process is underway. The Alder amendments were submitted today and will be released to the public on October 22nd. October 27th, 5 days later, is the committee of the whole meeting where the bulk of the discussion will happen amongst the alders. And then November 9th is the actual vote on the amendments and the adoption of the amended budget. I don't think that there's anything that's super related to transportation transit unless there happens to be an amendment related to that. Okay. These are typically adopted during the CIP process and not so much amended during the budget process, although it's certainly possible. But I just wanted to make you aware of that. And if you are interested in weighing in, November 9th, which is the day we will vote on amendments and vote on them, adopt the budget, there's a public hearing at the beginning of that meeting. So it's a common council meeting on Tuesday, November. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm saying the wrong date. Tuesday, November 10th. Hang on. Nope, it's Tuesday, November 9th. No, I was right. Okay, Tuesday, November 9th, 7:30 p.m. at the Common Council meeting. The first right up front is a public hearing. So just make a note of that, and you should see council amendments coming out on the 22nd. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. And unless there are further announcements, I would like a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 That's unanimous. This meeting is adjourned.